The winter wind howls across the frozen streets of St. Petersburg. The lamps flicker like dying souls, and somewhere, deep inside the marble corridors of the Tsar's palace, a whisper passes from servant to servant, trembling like a secret too dangerous to be spoken aloud. They say he cannot die. They say he sees through the veil of men's hearts. They say even the Tsarina herself fears his eyes. His name is Grigori Rasputin, the mad monk, the devil of the Romanovs, a man who crawled out of the dirt of Siberia and walked, uninvited, into the very heart of Russian power. And once he got there, he refused to let go. But before the myth, before the blood and the legend, there was just a man, born in 1869, in the small Siberian village of Pokrovskoy. Rasputin grew up among mud, frost, and silence. The village lay on the edge of the endless steppe, where the nights stretched longer than time itself. Life was hard, cruel, and bound by faith. Every peasant bowed to the land, to hunger, and to God. Yet even as a boy, Grigori was different. The villagers whispered that he had the eyes of a wolf, that when he looked at you, it felt like he could see something you couldn't. Something raw, hidden, buried beneath sin. They said he could heal horses with his touch, that he could predict the weather or the death of a neighbor. To some, he was a saint in rags. To others, a curse that walked on two legs. The truth, as always, was buried in the snow. As he grew older, that strange power within him began to burn. He married young to a woman named Praskovia and had children. But the fire inside him refused to be tamed. One night, he left his home, walked away into the frozen horizon, and never looked back. For years, he wandered across the vastness of Russia like a phantom. Through forests and monasteries, he begged, prayed, starved, and claimed to see visions of the Virgin Mary herself. The road turned him from man into myth. He met the wandering sects, the Klisti, fanatics who believed in finding God through sin, through exhaustion, through flesh. Whether Rasputin joined them or merely learned from them, no one knows. But something changed in him. When he returned to society, he carried himself like a prophet, his hair long and wild, his beard unkempt, his stare unrelenting. Wherever he went, people gathered. They said he could heal the sick, that his prayers could still storms, that he was a man chosen by God. Word spread, as rumors do, like a spark across dry straw. From the poor villages of Tobolsk to the salons of St. Petersburg, the legend of the holy man grew, and in the twilight of a dying empire, people were desperate to believe. By the early 1900s, Russia was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. The peasants starved while the aristocrats danced. The Tsar, Nicholas I, clung to a throne that had long since lost its divine glow. Revolution simmered beneath every street corner, every factory whistle. The empire was sick, and it didn't know it was dying. Into this decay walked Rasputin, a man who seemed to promise healing not just of the body, but of the soul. In 1905, he arrived in St. Petersburg, the glittering heart of Imperial Russia. To the nobles, he was a curiosity. To the devout, a miracle. To the cynical, a fraud. But to those who met him, one thing was undeniable. He had presence. His voice was deep and slow, hypnotic. His eyes, people said, could pierce through flesh and bone. Some claimed he smelled like the earth itself, like hay and sweat and incense. And that, somehow, made him feel real. The empire's elite, so used to the masks of power, found something intoxicating in his rawness. They invited him to their parlors, to their prayer meetings, to their tables. And Rasputin, the peasant from Siberia, sat among princes and bishops as if he had been born to it. It was during this time that fate brought him to the Tsarina. Alexandra Fyodorovna, she was a woman tormented by fear. Her son, the heir to the throne Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a disease that made even the smallest wound a death sentence. Doctors had failed. Priests had failed. Hope had died until Rasputin came. One night, when Alexei lay bleeding and near death, Rasputin was summoned to the palace. He placed his hand on the boy's head, whispered prayers in that deep, unhurried voice, and told the Tsarina not to fear. By morning, the bleeding stopped. Whether it was coincidence, hypnosis, or faith, it didn't matter. To Alexandra, it was a miracle. From that moment on, Rasputin was no longer just a holy man, he was family. He was the Tsar's secret weapon, the Tsarina's confessor, the empire's most dangerous man. But power, once tasted, is a poison that seeps into the soul. Rasputin began to believe his own legend. He drank heavily, wandered the streets at night, indulged in flesh and sin under the banner of divine forgiveness. His enemies called him the Antichrist. His followers called him a saint. The truth, he was both, and neither. As the Tsarina's dependence on him deepened, so did the hatred around him. Ministers, nobles, even members of the royal family began to see him as a threat. His influence over Alexandra was absolute. He could raise or ruin a career with a single word. The empire whispered that the German-born Tsarina was under his spell, that he controlled her body and soul. Caricatures flooded the streets, showing Rasputin in bed with her, laughing as Russia burned. The monarchy was bleeding credibility, and the man from Siberia stood at the center of the wound. But Rasputin didn't care. He believed he was chosen, that he could not die until his purpose was fulfilled. And perhaps in some twisted way he was right, for every attempt to bring him down failed. Every scandal, every accusation, every assassination plot, nothing worked. He seemed untouchable. The police followed him, priests denounced him, nobles cursed his name, but still he walked the halls of power, unbothered, unbroken. To his enemies it was madness, to his believers divine proof. And all the while, outside the palace walls, the empire trembled. The peasants starved. The soldiers mutinied. The fires of revolution spread. The Tsar, blind in his faith, clung to Rasputin as the last thread of hope, believing that as long as the holy man lived, so would his dynasty. But history is merciless. The thread was about to snap, and when it did, it would drag all of Russia into the abyss. The year is 1916. The snow falls heavier now, as if trying to bury the empire beneath its weight. The streets of Petrograd are thick with hunger, rumor, and rage. The war has bled Russia dry. Millions lie dead in frozen trenches. Bread lines stretch for miles. The soldiers curse the Tsar's name, and in the smoky taverns, revolution is no longer a whisper, it's a roar. But inside the palace, Rasputin still walks as if he owns the night. The guards bow to him, the servants tremble, and the Tsarina clings to his every word like scripture. Without him, she writes, we are lost. To her, he is more than a man, he is fate itself. To the rest of the empire, he is the symptom of everything that's wrong. Drunken orgies, political blackmail, bribes and prayers in the same breath. Rasputin moves through it all like a storm in human form, laughing, preaching, seducing, blessing. He believes he is God's instrument, sent to guide the Tsar's family through the apocalypse. But those who watch him from the shadows believe he is the apocalypse. Among them stands a young nobleman, Prince Felix Yusupov. Wealthy, charming, and vain, Yusupov has everything a man could want, except power. And Rasputin, the filthy peasant who whispers into the Tsarina's ear, stands in the way of all of it. Around Yusupov gathers a circle of conspirators, nobles, officers, politicians, all united by one goal, the destruction of the mad monk. They convince themselves that by killing Rasputin, they will save the monarchy. They believe his death will break the spell that holds the Tsarina captive. But they do not understand that the empire's decay runs deeper than any man. Still they plan, carefully, quietly. On a cold December night, in the heart of Petrograd, the trap is set. The air bites with frost. The river is frozen solid. In Yusupov's lavish palace, candles flicker in golden holders. A feast is laid, a final supper for a man who refuses to die. Rasputin arrives dressed in black, his beard glistening with snow. He is calm, almost amused. Perhaps he senses what's coming. Perhaps he welcomes it. Yusupov greets him with nervous charm, offering wine and cakes laced with cyanide. They talk, they laugh, they sing. The clock ticks. The poison should work by now. But Rasputin keeps talking, his eyes burning with that same strange fire that has haunted the empire for a decade. Hours pass. Still nothing. Yusupov begins to panic. The others waiting upstairs grow restless. Finally, in a haze of fear and disbelief, Yusupov draws a revolver. He raises it, fires once. The sound cracks through the palace like a gunshot through time. Rasputin falls. The conspirators breathe out in relief. It's over. Or so they think. They leave the body, whispering prayers of victory. But when Yusupov returns to look upon the corpse, the world shifts. Rasputin's eyes are open. He moves. He rises from the floor, blood spilling from his chest, staggering toward the prince like a nightmare made flesh. Yusupov screams. Rasputin claws his way toward the door, out into the snow, gasping, crawling alive. The others rush in, guns blazing. More shots, more blood. Still he moves. It takes bullets a beating, and finally, the icy waters of the Neva River to end him. They throw his body beneath the ice, the current swallowing the myth. But even then, the legend says, when his corpse was found days later, his arms were raised as if he'd tried to break through the surface, as if death itself had failed to hold him. Word of his murder spreads through Russia like wildfire. Some rejoice, believing the spell over the Tsar's family is broken. Others whisper in dread that the killing of the holy man will curse them all. The Tsarina collapses in grief, her faith shattered, her sanity fraying. She writes letters drenched in despair, calling his death the darkest sin of all. But in truth, Rasputin's death is only the beginning of the end. Within weeks, the empire begins to crumble. Revolution erupts in Petrograd. Soldiers mutiny, banners of red rise in the streets, and the cry for bread, peace, and land drowns out the last hymns of the Romanovs. Tsar Nicholas, blind to the storm, abdicates the throne. The dynasty that ruled for 300 years ends, not with a grand battle, but with a trembling signature on paper. And somewhere in the cold silence of Siberia, the legend of Rasputin begins to twist into prophecy. His final letter, written days before his death, surfaces. In it he warns that if he is killed by nobles, the Tsar and his family will be destroyed by the people, that none of his children will live beyond 2 years, that Russia will drown in blood, and when the revolution devours the empire, when the royal family is taken to a dark basement in Ekaterinburg and executed, bullet by bullet, Rasputin's prophecy comes true. The peasants whisper that the holy man had seen it all, that his spirit had risen from the river to watch the world burn, that even in death, Rasputin's eyes still gleamed through the smoke of the fallen empire. History remembers him as a monster, a mystic, a seducer, a prophet, a contradiction given human form. Even now, a century later, Rasputin refuses to die. His shadow lingers in songs, in stories, in the imagination of a world still fascinated by madness dressed as holiness. But who was he, truly? A saint who fell to temptation, or a devil who wore the mask of faith? The truth lies somewhere in the quiet between miracles and madness. Rasputin's power was not in spells or sorcery. It was in understanding people's hunger for belief. In a world collapsing under doubt, he offered certainty. In a court full of masks, he was raw, unfiltered, terrifyingly alive. He told them what they needed to hear, that suffering had meaning, that pain could be holy, that even decay was part of God's plan. And they believed him because they needed to, because belief is more powerful than reason when the world is falling apart. The Russian Empire was a dying animal thrashing in the snow. The monarchy, blind and desperate, grasped for any hand that promised salvation. Rasputin's was the hand they found, and it dragged them all into the abyss. After his death, his legend only grew. They said the Bolsheviks found his body in the river and cremated it, but that his corpse sat up in the fire as if trying to escape. Others swore his ghost haunted the Winter Palace, whispering warnings to those who would not listen. Soldiers in the Red Army claimed to see his face in the smoke of battle, his eyes glowing like coals. It didn't matter whether any of it was true. Rasputin had become an idea, a symbol of Russia's madness and mysticism intertwined, a man who embodied the chaos of his age. Even his name became prophecy. Rasputin, from Rasputny, meaning the debauched, the depraved. But the word also carries another meaning in the old tongue, the one who takes the wrong path. Perhaps that was his destiny, to walk the path no holy man should, to mix sin with salvation, flesh with faith, pleasure with prophecy. His life was a mirror held up to the empire itself, brilliant, corrupt, spiritual, doomed. Those who killed him believed they were saving Russia. In truth, they only accelerated its fall, because Rasputin was not the disease, he was the symptom. He rose because the people had lost faith in everything else. When reason failed, when the church crumbled, when the throne wavered, they turned to the wild-eyed man from Siberia. They turned to myth. And when he died, there was no one left to believe in. The empire shattered into revolution, civil war, and blood. Yet even amid that chaos, stories of Rasputin persisted, how his stare could tame animals, how his voice could calm the Tsarevich's bleeding, how he predicted his own death, how he warned the Tsar that the war would destroy Russia, that he would be cursed if he ignored the suffering of the poor. Perhaps, deep down, Rasputin saw more clearly than anyone else. Perhaps he knew that the empire's faith was hollow, that it would all come crashing down. Or perhaps he was simply lucky, a man who rode the storm of superstition and found himself mistaken for a god. History rarely gives simple answers. Rasputin remains an enigma, a man who began in obscurity and ended as a symbol of the end of an age. His eyes, described by all who met him as impossible to forget, seemed to stare at us still from old photographs, defying time. There is something both terrifying and tragic in them, something that says, "You don't understand me, and you never will." And maybe that's the point. Maybe Rasputin wasn't meant to be understood. He was meant to be felt, a force, not a figure, the embodiment of faith twisted by desperation, of power corrupted by belief. In the end, the story of Rasputin is not about one man. It's about the death of an empire, about what happens when people mistake charisma for divinity, when the line between God and man blurs until both are lost in the fog. The snow continues to fall over the ruins of St. Petersburg. The palaces stand empty, their gilded halls echoing with the ghosts of an age that thought itself eternal. Somewhere, in that silence, the wind carries a whisper, a prayer, a curse, or maybe just a name, Rasputin, the man who could not die, the man who saw the empire's end in his own reflection. And though his body has long turned to dust, his legend remains, an eternal reminder that in the twilight of empires, it is never reason that rules, but faith, madness, and the terrible beauty of belief. If you felt the chill of Rasputin's shadow, the madness, the mystery, the prophecy that outlived him, then join us as we uncover more forgotten corners of the past. From kings and killers to prophets and pretenders, history is never silent. It only waits to be heard. Subscribe to Unsolved History, where every story drags you deeper into the darkness of time. Like the video, share the legend, and step with us into the echoes of the world that was. Because the past isn't dead, it's only sleeping.